The mansion stood at the edge of the world, or so Cassia believed. Its stone walls were dark and weathered, held together more by habit than strength. The air inside was stale, as if time itself had forgotten how to move here. Cassia drifted through the halls like a ghost, careful to avoid her reflection. Not that she could see it. There were no mirrors, no glass, not even a puddle allowed to settle for too long. She had grown up with her mother's warnings.
You mustn't look, Cassia. If you do, the curse will take you.
But her mother was gone now. The warnings remained, burned into her mind, a mantra she couldn't shake. The days were long, the nights longer. Cassia filled her time with books from the library, their pages brittle and yellowed. She read about faraway lands she would never see, about people who danced in the sunlight without fear. She wondered what that would feel like. The outside world had not seen her in years. The villagers called her a recluse, a tragic figure. They whispered tales of a girl cursed to live in shadows. None dared to visit. Until he came. It was dusk when the knock echoed through the mansion. Cassia froze. The sound was foreign, sharp against the stillness she had grown used to. She approached the door, her bare feet silent on the cold floor. Who would dare come here?
Miss Cassia,
The stranger said when she opened the door. His voice was low, his eyes cautious. He was tall and clad in a coat that looked like it had seen better days.
I knew your mother.
Her breath caught. She hadn't heard her mother's name spoken aloud in years. The stranger continued, his words deliberate.
She sent me. I promised her I'd look after you.
Cassia stepped back, her mind racing. Her mother had never spoken of anyone outside the mansion. The rules were clear. No mirrors, no visitors, no exceptions. And yet, here he was. I don't need looking after, she said, her voice steady but cold. She had learned to keep people at a distance. It was safer that way. But the stranger didn't leave.
Your mother thought you'd say that.
He said with a faint smile.
But there are things you don't know, Cassia. About her. About you.
The words hung in the air like a storm cloud. Cassia felt the weight of them settle over her, heavy and unfamiliar. What could he possibly mean? The mansion seemed to grow darker as she stood there, her hand gripping the door. For the first time in years, Cassia felt something stir within her, a fragile, trembling thing she almost didn't recognize. Hope. The stranger sat in the parlor, a room Cassia had not stepped into in years. Dust blanketed the furniture, and the faint scent of decaying wood lingered in the air. He seemed at ease, as though he belonged here. She hated it. You still haven't told me your name, she said, standing rigid by the door, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. The man looked up, his gaze calm but unwavering.
My name is Elias. I'm here to help you understand.
Cassia scoffed. Understand what? That my mother sent you to meddle in a life that doesn't need meddling? Her words were sharp, but inside she felt a growing unease, as though the walls themselves were closing in. Elias leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. His voice softened.
She was protecting you, Cassia. But the truth is something you deserve to know. Even if it hurts.
Silence stretched between them, heavy and oppressive. Cassia turned her head, her eyes landing on the corner of the room where a large, cloth-covered frame leaned against the wall. She had never dared to touch it. She didn't have to know what it was to feel the weight of it. Elias followed her gaze.
That mirror. It's the key.
He stood, his movements deliberate.
You've been running from the truth your whole life, but it's been here all along.
Cassia felt her pulse quicken. The air in the room seemed thicker now, like the mansion itself was holding its breath. No, she said firmly. It's forbidden. Elias didn't stop. He approached the frame and placed a hand on the cloth, his expression unreadable.
Your mother was afraid of what you might see. But it wasn't fear for you, Cassia. It was fear of you.
Cassia froze, his words slicing through her like a blade. Fear of me? It was absurd, wasn't it? She was no threat. Just a girl trapped in a crumbling house with nothing but ghosts for company. Wasn't she? Elias pulled the cloth away in one swift motion. The mirror beneath was ornate, its silver frame tarnished and cracked. The glass itself was dark, almost opaque, as though it had forgotten how to reflect.
Look,
Elias said, his voice both gentle and insistent.
See yourself for what you are.
Cassia's hands trembled as she took a hesitant step forward. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to stop, to turn away, to hide. But something stronger pulled her closer. She stood before the mirror, her breath fogging the surface. At first, she saw nothing, just darkness, endless and empty. But then, slowly, a shape began to emerge. Her shape. Her reflection rippled, like water disturbed by a stone. It wasn't right. Her face was there, but it was fractured, shifting. Pieces of someone else. Pieces of nothing at all. She stumbled back, her voice barely a whisper. What am I? Elias's face was somber, his eyes heavy with unspoken truths.
You are not what you think you are, Cassia. You were never human. You're her grief, her pain, her reflection made flesh.
The room seemed to tilt, the walls shuddering with the weight of the revelation. Cassia clutched at the edge of the table, her mind a whirlwind of denial and fear. It couldn't be true. It couldn't be. But deep down, in the quietest corner of her soul, she knew it was. The mansion felt alive, its groans and creaks echoing through the halls as if reacting to the revelation. Cassia sat motionless on the cold floor, her gaze fixed on the mirror. The distorted reflection stared back, its edges flickering like a dying flame. Grief, she whispered, the word tasting foreign on her tongue. I'm just grief. Her voice trembled, but no tears came. Could grief itself even cry? Elias crouched beside her, his presence steady but unobtrusive.
You're more than that, Cassia. You're her strength. Her will to keep going. Her love for what she lost.
She turned to him, her eyes narrowing. Her love? The words burned as they left her lips. Then why did she hide me? Why did she let me rot in this place, thinking I was cursed? Elias hesitated, his expression pained.
She thought she was protecting you. Protecting herself. But fear. Fear warps even the purest intentions.
Cassia shook her head, anger flaring like a spark in the dark. No. She abandoned me. She created me and then couldn't bear to face what she'd done. The mansion groaned louder, the walls seeming to buckle inward. Dust fell from the ceiling in soft cascades. Elias rose to his feet, urgency creeping into his voice.
This house isn't safe anymore, Cassia. It's tied to you, to what you are. If you stay, it will crumble, and so will you.
Cassia pushed herself up, her legs unsteady beneath her. Then what am I supposed to do? Walk out into a world that doesn't even know I exist? That wasn't made for this? Elias stepped closer, his voice firm.
You can make it your world. You're not bound by what she made you to be. You can choose.
The word lingered in the air, choose. Cassia's hands clenched into fists. She glanced at the mirror one last time. Her reflection no longer wavered. It was solid now, whole. But it wasn't human. It wasn't her. What if I don't want to be this? She asked, her voice barely audible. Elias's expression softened.
Then don't. Shed it. Become something else. You're not bound to her grief anymore.
The mansion shuddered violently, a crack splitting the floor beneath them. Elias reached out a hand, his voice urgent.
Cassia, it's time. You have to decide. Now.
Her heart pounded as she looked around, the walls closing in like the jaws of a great beast. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to escape, but something deeper held her in place. Slowly, she reached toward the mirror, her fingers brushing the cool glass. The reflection rippled again, but this time it wasn't fear she felt. It was clarity. She wasn't human. But she was something. Let it burn, she said softly, stepping back from the mirror. Elias's eyes widened in surprise, but he nodded, understanding. The mansion began to collapse, beams groaning and splintering as the air filled with dust and debris. Cassia stood firm, the chaos swirling around her. She felt the weight of the house, the years of loneliness and grief, crumble with it. And then there was silence. When Cassia opened her eyes, she stood outside the ruins, the night sky stretching endlessly above her. The air was crisp and new, untainted by the shadows of the past. Elias was gone. Whether he had escaped or simply vanished, she didn't know. All she knew was that she was free.